Welcome to the Rave Reviews Book Club, Writers Conference, and Book Expo for 2018. I'm glad you can join this little chinwag on Killing Your Darlings. I'm Ron Yates, and I'll be taking you on this journey. So sit back, relax, and open your minds. You know, there's nothing more difficult for an author than to kill off a favorite character. After all, they're like close relatives. We grow to love them, and we grieve when we lose them. So when Stephen King advises us to kill your darlings, many authors find that advice really difficult to follow. As a recovering journalist, I found myself intrigued by the origination of that phrase, and as newspaper hacks are wont to do, I decided to do a little sleuthing. Actually, the adage, kill your darlings, has been around a long time. Long before Stephen King wrote, kill your darlings, even when it breaks your egocentric little scribbler's heart. Kill your darlings. In fact, it has been variously attributed through the years to such successful authors as Oscar Wilde, Eudora Welty, G.K. Chesterton, and William Faulkner. However, the earliest known example of the phrase comes not from any of those excellent writers, but from a somewhat obscure scribbler named Arthur Quillers Couch, who in a 1914 lecture on style at Cambridge University said this: "If you here require a practical rule of me, I will present you with this. Whenever you feel an impulse to perpetuate a piece of exceptionally fine writing, obey it wholeheartedly, and delete it before sending your manuscript to press. Murder your darlings." Okay, with that bit of historical research out of the way, let's get down to the purpose of this presentation. When, how, and why to kill off characters we create in our novels. Now, I'm not talking about those reprehensible villains and scheming miscreants that sometimes populate our stories. Most of us kill them off without a second thought, often in the most horrible ways. No, I'm talking about those characters we authors and our readers grow to love. Without revealing who, I can disclose to you that in all 3 books of my Finding Billy Battles trilogy, I killed off at least 1 or 2 characters that I had come to love and who I thought I could not live without. In a couple of cases it was heart-wrenching. For example, before I killed one beloved character off in book 3, I had to leave my computer and take a long walk by myself so I could pre-mourn the loss of this person. It was that difficult. When I finally got up the nerve to do it, I felt like the lowest kind of felon. In fact, as I look back on the trilogy and the number of beautiful people I killed off, I sometimes feel like a serial killer. I'm sure I'm not alone. When Sir Arthur Conan Doyle killed off Sherlock Holmes by having him plummet headlong into the Reichenbach Falls, thousands of English readers were so outraged that Doyle was forced to resurrect the celebrated sleuth in The Hound of the Baskervilles. If you're a writer who is fortunate enough to have a broad fan base, like Doyle did, you must be forever vigilant when it comes to killing off your darlings. So how do you kill off a favorite character without killing your fan base? More important, why should you murder your darlings? Several years ago, as I was moving from journalism into academia and then into fiction, I received this advice from a colleague at the University of Illinois who taught creative writing. As an author of fiction, you must be mean to your characters, he told me. That was great advice. If we write a story in which our protagonist is never hurt, never damaged, never challenged, never mistreated, or who never makes a mistake, we are just not reflecting reality. I recall a poster a fellow editor at the Chicago Tribune had in his office. It read, "Life is hard, then you die." Who do you know who has ever gone through this life without suffering in some way? Do you know someone who is infallible? always right? I doubt it. All of us suffer in some way during our lives, whether it's because of the loss of a loved one, or because of some affliction that we must deal with, or because of something we did that has resulted in retribution, earned or not. No, there is nothing easy about life. Therefore, why create worlds for our characters that look like that? If you do, your story will lack the ring of truth, and your readers will notice immediately. Why kill your darlings? The answer is simple. You do it because it makes your story authentic and your characters human and vulnerable. Then there's the question of when in your story to kill off one of your characters. There is no hard and fast rule, but I believe the death of a prominent character should occur when his or her demise has the most significant impact on your story. For example, when it advances the plot and when it motivates other characters to do something, seek revenge, mourn, begin anew, etc. The best character deaths are heartrending for the author and the reader. But whatever you do, you must resist the urge to save a character. And you must also resist the impulse to shock readers with a character's death just for the sake of shocking them or making them feel miserable. George R.R. Martin, author of the Game of Thrones books, may not want to make his readers miserable, but he does want to scare them and keep them on edge. I want my readers to be afraid when my characters are in danger, says Martin. I want them to be afraid to turn the next page because the next character may not survive it. I recall feeling pretty sad after reading 3/4 of Larry McMurtry's Lonesome Dove, only to discover that Gus McCrae dies in Montana of blood poisoning caused by a gangrenous leg. I hated to see Woodrow Call's closest friend die, but at least it was not an abrupt end to the book. A year goes by, and Call packs Gus's embalmed body in a coffin preserved with salt and charcoal and transports him back to Texas from Montana. This added more story, during which Woodrow fulfills Gus's last wish to be buried in Texas. It also gave me time to mourn and learn how Gus's death impacted the lives of the remaining characters. Knowing when to kill a character will influence how you kill him or her. You need to consider what the purpose of a character's death is. Ideally, you might want a reader to imagine how the story would continue if the character had survived. So how do you kill off one of your darlings? Years ago, when I was the West Coast bureau chief of the Chicago Tribune, I had the opportunity to interview Alfred Hitchcock. So when I was thinking about the ways to kill a character, I immediately thought of the master of murder and mayhem. Here's the old master himself. Look at that face. He never had a problem killing his darlings. Just take a look at the many ways Hitchcock dispatched his characters in his films. Go ahead, take your time. I'll hold this slide here for a while so you can examine this delicious menu of options to choose from when it comes to bumping off your darlings. While you do that, I'll tell you some of the things Hitchcock said about killing people, in his films, of course. Write your murders like love scenes, and write your love scenes like murders, he said. Here's another gem. Some of our most exquisite murders have been performed with tenderness in simple, homey places, like the kitchen table. Hitchcock also said, one must never set up a murder. It must happen unexpectedly, as in life. And finally, this bit of Hitchcockian advice. I have a perfect cure for sore throat. Cut it. Perhaps the number one thing to remember is this. Never kill off a primary character in a trifling or inconsequential way. For example, your main character should not die from an infected hangnail, unless, of course, it is tied in some way to the plot. Is the owner of this nail salon an arch enemy? Also, you should never kill your protagonist just because you aren't sure what to do next with your story. In other words, don't use a primary character's death as a convenient solution to an issue with your storyline. First, you will lose a good character. And second, you will be tempted to resurrect him or her once you find your groove with the story. And whatever you do, please do not use any of these hackneyed plot devices if you are attempted to resurrect your protagonist. Your darling is retrieved from the great majority by a miraculous new drug that reverses death. Or, it was actually your darling's twin brother who died of infection, not your protagonist. Oh, please. Or, your main character wakes up and realizes everything was just a dream. Another thing to consider is the purpose of your darling's death. Some authors agonize over a character's death and draw the process out way too long. For example, the deaths of two of my characters lasted just a couple of days. There was minimal suffering, and during that time, I was able to keep my readers' hopes alive that these two characters would somehow cheat the Grim Reaper. Here's another caveat. Do not create a character who exists just to die. First, that death will have little or no impact on the reader because there is not enough time to develop an emotional connection to the character. Readers will pick up on the fact that you have conceived this ill-fated character solely so he or she may be dispatched by one of your heavies or your protagonist. As I often told my students when I was teaching a class in feature writing at the University of Illinois, the only person smarter than the writer is the reader. The death of one of your darlings has an impact when your readers feel a real sense of loss. That only occurs when readers have invested a lot of emotional currency in one of your main characters. How you dispatch one of your darlings is an essential part of any story. Be sure you think hard about how to go about it. Make sure it is impactful, fits into the plot, and moves the story along. If you don't, your readers will feel cheated. It's critical to convincing your readers that they have lost something or someone important. You can't fake that. And readers never appreciate being tormented without good reason. One of the most enjoyable things a writer can do is create characters. Watch them come alive right in front of you, and then allow them to populate your story. When that happens, successful writers can sense that they've captured their character's unique personality in a way that readers will appreciate. But every character you create exists to serve your story. I know at the beginning of my work when I will need characters to suffer or die. And if those moments are gripping, I feel fulfilled as a writer. I enjoy creating characters from nothing, but I'm not so attached to them that I'll keep them alive when I know it makes more sense for them to die. If the plot calls for them to make mistakes and suffer and maybe even get themselves killed, then that's what'll happen. Yes, they may feel like real people in my head, but they're still mine to use as I see fit. And I'm not about to let them manipulate any plots in their favor. In fact, if any of my characters ever refuse to participate in the plot of my novel, well, I would kill them. Remember the Greek gods who manipulated mortals from Mount Olympus? That's you as an author. You must never allow a favorite character to dictate your story only because you can't bring yourself to kill him or her off. Zeus never hesitated to dispatch one of Earth's mortal beings, and neither should you. Not long ago, a couple of other writers and I were having a conversation about the kinds of comic books we read while we were growing up. Now, I mentioned that when I was a newly minted teenager, I read comic books about Archie and Jughead and Betty and Veronica and their collection of teenage friends. Then, one of my writer friends asked me this: if Archie was a character in one of your novels, could you kill him? Ha, damn right, I answered. If his death would advance my story, well, hell, I would even kill Veronica, and man, did I used to have a crush on her. No, your job as an author is to tell a compelling story, one that's convincing and credible. Your readers must believe it, and you help them do that with believable characters. Ernest Hemingway and Edward Albee both had some great advice when it comes to populating novels with believable characters. One way to do what they said is to create convincing characters that are just as vulnerable as the reader. Readers search for that vulnerability in a character because they know that's what makes a character real. Of course, character development also requires depth, emotion, voice, description, conflict, and something the character needs, is looking for, or is running from. Okay, I confess, in my trilogy, I did my best to create characters that embodied those attributes and motivations. Then I killed off some of them. Okay, if I could do it, here is where I would cue the diabolical and fiendish laugh. Instead, I would just say that when I dispatched those characters, I felt like my keyboard was dripping with blood. So you see, when it comes to killing my darlings, I'm not only talking the talk, I'm walking the walk. And you should do the same in your books. So go get that gun, get that axe, get that knife, or that bottle of poison, and get to work. You won't regret it. Well, maybe just a little bit. But hey, that's life. Or death. In the meantime, I want to thank you for joining me today on this little literary excursion. I hope you found it interesting and helpful. And whatever you do, remember this: don't be afraid to kill your darlings. Don't worry, nobody's looking, and just think, you're getting away with murder.